On the morning of the 6th of August in the year 1944, a hazy golden light broke over the rugged landscape of Brittany, slipping through the clouds of dust and smoke that hung over the roads and fields. The rumble of American tanks and armored vehicles reverberated along narrow country lanes, echoing off stone walls, medieval townhouses, and dense groves. The liberation of France, which had begun as a hopeful summer of progress, was now transforming into a complex and desperate race. A race against German resistance, against the stubborn geography of the peninsula, and against time itself. In quiet villages, residents peered cautiously from windows, hedgerows, and doorways. The sight of armored columns, turreted vehicles sliding along the twisting roads, was more than a military display. It was a sign that the German grip on Brittany was weakening. Children waved makeshift flags, and elderly farmers lowered their heads in silent prayer as columns of American tanks rolled past. For the soldiers driving forward, the cheering and relief on civilian faces served as a reminder that this was not merely a tactical advance, but a mission to liberate a homeland held in fear and submission for 4 long years. Yet the Americans would soon discover that not all allies were in uniform, and that not all battles were won by steel, shells, and gunfire alone. From the shadows of barns, cellars, and forests, figures clad in civilian clothing and French tricolor armbands began to appear, shaping the campaign in ways that the German forces could never anticipate or fully understand. Only weeks earlier, Lieutenant General George S. Patton's Third Army had surged out of Normandy, following the success of Operation Cobra. German defensive lines, battered by months of relentless air attacks and ground offensives, had dissolved into disarray. Patton, unchained and fueled by an audacious temperament, drove forward with breathtaking speed. His mission was clear: exploit the breakout, annihilate German formations, and liberate French territory as rapidly as humanly possible. One of his principal objectives lay in Brittany, a peninsula whose port cities, Brest, Lorient, and Saint-Nazaire, had been fortified to near obsession by the German High Command. Hitler's strategy was simple yet menacing: deny the Allies the use of these deep-water ports, preventing the rapid resupply of forces and slowing the Allied advance into Western Europe. Each fortified city was a puzzle of artillery emplacements, bunkers, minefields, and coastal guns, designed to hold out for weeks, perhaps months, against any attempt at capture. Brittany, however, was not Normandy. Here the roads twisted like threads through the countryside, threading between hedgerows, ridges, and villages untouched by modernization. Tanks, the symbol of Patton's doctrine of speed and mobility, could find themselves trapped in narrow lanes, ambushed from hidden corners, or funneled into kill zones, meticulously prepared by German defenders who had lived in the region for 4 years. These defenders, especially the paratroopers and naval infantry garrisoned at Brest, were among the most disciplined and determined soldiers the Wehrmacht had left in Western Europe. The challenge for Patton was more than simple firepower. To advance safely through Brittany required knowledge beyond what maps, aerial photography, and reconnaissance could provide. It required human intelligence, local eyes and ears with an intimate understanding of the terrain. Slowly, cautiously at first, these local allies began to reveal themselves. They were French men and women, some in their teens, others middle-aged or older, who called themselves the Forces Françaises de l'Intérieur, the FFI. To the average American soldier, encountering the FFI for the first time was like stepping into a legend. They seemed to appear from nowhere, emerging from barns, attics, root cellars, haystacks, and thick woodland. Their clothing was civilian, their weapons varied and often cobbled together from captured German Mausers, British Stens, grenades, and other implements of war. Despite their mismatched gear, their expertise in navigating the countryside, identifying enemy positions, and exploiting weaknesses was unmatched. They knew which roads were mined, which bridges wired for demolition, and which farmhouses were commandeered by German officers. They could point out hidden snipers, guide tank columns through unseen paths, and transmit messages faster than any radio network could. Patton's commanders quickly realized a truth that would define the Brittany campaign. No map was more accurate than a French resistance fighter familiar with the land. At first, the Americans approached the FFI with cautious optimism. Concerns over discipline, identification, and coordination made some officers skeptical. Yet the FFI were not novices. For years, they had waged clandestine war against the EE occupiers, sabotaging supply lines, assassinating officers, disrupting railways, and transmitting intelligence to London. Now they emerged in strength, often unfurling tricolor flags as they stepped into the open, aware that discovery by the Gestapo or milice earlier could have meant torture or death. Initially, their role was simple: guiding armored units, indicating safe passages, and alerting American forces to dangers. Gradually, however, their responsibilities expanded to include direct combat support, reconnaissance, and coordinated assaults. As Patton's columns pressed deeper into Brittany, German forces withdrew to strongpoints around the peninsula's fortified ports. Patton was determined to seize these ports swiftly, not merely to deprive the Germans of resupply and retreat, but also because Allied planners hoped to use the facilities for reinforcements and supplies. Yet the Germans were well prepared. Brest, under the command of General Oberst Hermann Bernhard Ramke, A.B. Tautrade, paratrooper known for ruthless efficiency and strict discipline, became the focal point of resistance. The city's defenses were multi-layered: bunkers, coastal artillery, anti-tank obstacles, minefields, and fortified medieval structures transformed into formidable fortresses. Every mile toward Brest was contested, every advance costly, and every strategic decision critical. The FFI quickly proved indispensable. Riding atop American tank destroyers and shouting directions over the roar of engines, they guided armored units through the intricate maze of bocage. On foot, they scouted enemy positions, identified weaknesses, and assisted in planning assaults. Women in occupied villages offered shelter to reconnaissance teams, relayed intelligence, and in many cases, personally conducted sabotage operations. Bridges that German forces attempted to use for retreat were often destroyed or seized by resistance fighters first. One American tanker later remarked that the FFI smelled Germans like hunters sense prey, demonstrating a level of local intelligence and intuition that surpassed any technological advantage. Machine gun nests, concealed trucks, anti-tank emplacements, nothing escaped their notice. For the Americans, this human intelligence shortened engagements, saved countless lives, and sustained the relentless forward momentum crucial to Patton's campaign. In time, the American command structure recognized the FFI as more than guides. Patton, a general who valued initiative and results above all, instructed his officers to integrate them into combat operations. FFI detachments participated in missions ranging from securing crossroads to intercepting enemy communications. On some occasions, they conducted daring raids on German strongpoints. Their discipline, courage, and local knowledge often outperformed expectations, enabling the surrender of entire pockets without necessitating heavy casualties from American forces. By late August, formal joint task forces began to emerge, blending American combat units with FFI detachments. This partnership was born not of propaganda, but of necessity, as the battlefield demanded precision, intelligence, and coordination. German troops accustomed to controlling the countryside now found themselves hunted by invisible yet lethal foes. Telephone lines were cut, convoys ambushed, and stragglers captured. Morale among German soldiers began to collapse as they realized that even civilians were actively working against them. Many would later testify that Brittany had been psychologically exhausting, not due to the might of American tanks, but because the French were everywhere. The Battle for Brest exemplified the strength of this cooperation and would become the largest engagement in Brittany. Among those fighting for the city was Colonel James Earl Rudder's 2nd Ranger Battalion, already legendary for their actions on the 6th of June 1944, scaling Pointe du Hoc under heavy fire to destroy German coastal guns. The Rangers' reputation preceded them, and German paratroopers defending Brest knew that these elite troops represented a lethal threat. The coastal forts around Brest were formidable. Reinforced concrete, thick walls, interlocking fields of fire, and positions designed to resist prolonged sieges. They were garrisons manned by men committed to fighting to the last round, rationing ammunition, and holding out against overwhelming odds. The Americans needed precise reconnaissance, stealth, and local knowledge to breach these positions. FFI guides, having studied the terrain for years, became invaluable collaborators. Together with the Rangers, they formed task forces capable of infiltrating fortified positions, bypassing minefields, mapping hidden entrances, and coordinating assaults with a level of skill that seemed almost preternatural. When attacks commenced, the synergy between American troops and resistance fighters was evident. FFI units provided suppressive fire with captured German weapons, while Rangers maneuvered through craters and trenches, lobbing explosives into enemy positions. German defenders, surprised by the seemingly omnipresent attackers, often surrendered sooner than anticipated. The resistance gained weapons, recognition, and credibility, while American forces benefited from reduced casualties and enhanced operational efficiency. Street by street, bunker by bunker, the fight for Brest progressed with relentless intensity. German paratroopers and naval infantry displayed tenacity, snipers hunted commanders, and fortified cellars claimed entire platoons. Despite the absence of significant Luftwaffe support, German artillery exacted a toll on advancing troops. Yet the encirclement tightened. The FFI disrupted retreats, destroyed rail lines, and even protected American tanks during the night, ensuring that enemy forces could not mount counterattacks. Colonel Rudder's unit became a symbol of cooperation, demonstrating that conventional and irregular forces could function as a single effective unit. German prisoners often expressed disbelief at the involvement of civilians. Some questioned how bandits could coordinate with the Americans. The answer, simple and powerful, was that they were patriots fighting for their homeland. By mid-September, Ramacke's forces, exhausted and surrounded, surrendered. Although Brest's port facilities were heavily damaged, the victory removed the last major German stronghold in Brittany and underscored the effectiveness of irregular warfare when integrated with conventional armies. Liberation brought jubilation across Brittany. Women emerged from hiding, waving tricolor flags, and men paraded captured German helmets through liberated streets. Church bells rang freely for the first time in years, while children climbed atop jeeps to cheer American soldiers. Yet, amid the celebrations, the toll of war remained evident. Rubble, scorched vehicles, shell casings, and dark stains on the streets testified to the violence endured. Americans rotated out for rest and redeployment, while the FFI assumed responsibilities for managing prisoners, maintaining order, and demonstrating discipline commensurate with their heroism. Patton recognized the strategic importance of the FFI. Reports from his corps commanders highlighted their invaluable contributions, securing bridges, guiding columns, intercepting enemy communications, and providing actionable intelligence. They had fought without pay, often with minimal weaponry, and maintained operations with remarkable resilience. The resistance, rather than dispersing after liberation, organized to secure towns, oversee prisoners, and facilitate reconstruction. This collaboration revealed an enduring principle. The combination of mechanized armies with dedicated local forces could amplify the effectiveness of a campaign beyond conventional expectations. Perfect. Let's continue the full, expanded script, building on where we left off, keeping suspense, vivid detail, and historical immersion. This section will deepen the Brittany campaign, resistance heroics, German reactions, and post-liberation consequences, moving toward the 8,500-word target. As the Americans shifted focus from Brest to other fortified pockets in Brittany, the strategic and psychological significance of the FFI became even more apparent. In towns like Lorient and Saint-Nazaire, German commanders had been ordered by Hitler himself to hold their positions to the last cartridge. The Reich believed that even isolated resistance could tie down Allied divisions, delaying the push into the heart of Germany. Yet, despite the apparent hopelessness of the situation, the resistance remained vigilant. Night after night, young men on bicycles pedaled along winding country lanes, mapping German troop movements, noting supply depots, and memorizing the markings on trucks. Mothers and wives, once relegated to domestic roles under occupation, became critical intelligence assets. A seamstress might overhear a German officer mention a scheduled ammunition shipment. A baker might leave coded messages in loaves that would be retrieved by a local courier. Their work was invisible yet vital, turning the civilian landscape into a battlefield, as lethal and consequential as any open engagement. American commanders grew increasingly dependent on this intelligence. When artillery units received FFI reports of ammunition stores or troop concentrations, they could target positions with precision that aerial reconnaissance could never achieve. Airstrikes and shelling could be timed and focused, minimizing civilian casualties while maximizing the impact on German defensive capacity. The resistance had a nuanced understanding of terrain, recognizing where roads narrowed to natural choke points, which farmhouses provided observation posts, and where underground cellars and tunnels could conceal both enemy and friendly forces. Patton, always a man who valued efficiency and results over convention, recognized that this local expertise could multiply the effectiveness of his mechanized thrusts far beyond what numbers alone could accomplish. Yet cooperation was not always smooth. Language barriers, differing tactical philosophies, and even mutual skepticism sometimes caused friction. FFI fighters, long accustomed to independent operations and local decision-making, could bristle at formal military commands, while American officers occasionally questioned the audacity and improvisational style of civilian partisans. Despite this, necessity prevailed. Battles could not wait for perfect coordination, and mutual respect developed under fire. By late August, joint planning sessions became routine. FFI liaisons were assigned to American battalions, their intimate knowledge of terrain and enemy dispositions invaluable in shaping tactical decisions. Reports circulated among American officers noting that a single FFI scout could provide intelligence equivalent to a company of conventional reconnaissance troops. The story of Brittany's liberation was filled with moments of heroism that could have been lifted from legend. One evening in early September, a small team of FFI fighters learned that a German supply convoy was scheduled to pass a crossroads near a hamlet southwest of Brest. The resistance set a trap, coordinating with a nearby American unit. Under cover of darkness, they ambushed the convoy, capturing a full complement of trucks loaded with ammunition and fuel. No American soldiers were involved in the initial strike, yet the operation saved countless lives by denying the Germans resources that could have been used to reinforce Brest's defenses. Similarly, women in the villages hid American scouts from German patrols, sometimes feeding them sustenance, sometimes providing cover, while messages were relayed along routes known only to locals. These acts of courage, though small in isolation, collectively undermined German capacity and morale in ways that tanks and artillery alone could never achieve. The siege of Brest itself continued to serve as a crucible for American resistance cooperation. While street-by-street combat consumed energy and resources, the FFI's intimate knowledge of the urban environment proved decisive. They identified cellars and tunnels used by German snipers, revealed hidden bunkers, and guided demolition teams to weak points in walls and fortifications. American Rangers, accustomed to scaling cliffs and assaulting fortified positions, found themselves relying increasingly on the FFI's expertise. Together, they conducted operations that blended stealth, audacity, and firepower. In one instance, a small FFI squad navigated a maze of ruined streets to flank a German battery that had been preventing American tanks from advancing. The operation succeeded without casualties, a testament to local knowledge, planning, and courage under fire. Even the Germans recognized the threat posed by the resistance. Officers like Generaloberst Ramke, while acknowledging the skill and tenacity of American forces, regarded the FFI with disdain, labeling them bandits rather than legitimate combatants. Yet no amount of contempt could diminish the effectiveness of the resistance, whose actions eroded German morale daily. German paratroopers, once confident in their ability to hold the peninsula, found themselves constantly harried, forced to guard supply routes, repair destroyed infrastructure, and respond to ambushes that seemed to appear from nowhere. German reports later described Brittany as psychologically exhausting, a region where the enemy could never feel secure, where civilians could strike at will, and where even the countryside seemed hostile. By mid-September, the culmination of these efforts resulted in the surrender of Brest. General Ramke's forces, encircled, out of supplies, and, exhausted by relentless pressure, laid down their arms. Although the port itself was heavily damaged and rendered unusable for Allied logistics in the immediate term, the symbolic victory was immense. The last major German stronghold in Brittany had fallen, demonstrating the lethal efficacy of combined conventional and irregular operations. Celebrations erupted across the peninsula. Villagers, who had lived under the shadow of occupation for years, poured into streets waving tricolor flags. Children climbed atop American jeeps, and church bells rang freely once more. Amid the jubilation, however, the cost of war remained evident in the rubble, scorched vehicles, and shell-pocked streets that bore silent witness to months of violence. Even after Brest fell, pockets of German resistance remained in Brittany, particularly around Lorient and Saint-Nazaire. These fortress ports continued to resist, following Hitler's orders to hold out until Germany's surrender. The fighting there was less mobile, characterized by sieges, artillery duels, and targeted raids, yet the principles established earlier in the campaign held. American forces relied on FFI intelligence, coordination, and sabotage to undermine German positions. Civilians continued to risk their lives to feed information to Allied commanders. Fishermen observed German naval movements under cover of night. Farmhands noted the arrival of trucks and rail shipments, and teachers, clerks, and laborers alike transmitted messages through coded signals, chalk markings, and hidden notes. In each instance, the local populace acted as an invisible arm of the army, providing insights, observations, and intelligence that conventional forces could not generate. As the weeks passed, the mutual respect between American troops and the FFI solidified. Rangers and infantrymen shared meals, cigarettes, and stories with partisans, exchanging accounts of ambushes, sabotage, and combat under fire. Language barriers occasionally caused confusion, but the shared experience of survival and victory transcended cultural divides. Veterans of the Pointe du Hoc assault recounted the horrors of scaling cliffs under machine gun fire, while FFI fighters described nights spent cutting rail lines or ambushing German supply trains. These stories were not recounted for glory, but as part of a growing collective memory of resistance, camaraderie, and liberation. The FFI also bore responsibilities beyond active combat. They guarded prisoners, maintained order in newly liberated towns, and facilitated the transition from occupation to freedom. Treating German captives in accordance with the laws of war required discipline, a challenge for men and women who had lived under years of oppression and personal loss. Many in the resistance viewed this as a test of legitimacy, proving to themselves and the world that they were soldiers of France, not mere vigilantes. Reports from American officers frequently highlighted the professionalism and restraint exhibited by the FFI, noting their reliability, courage, and organizational capacity. Through the autumn of 1944, as American units moved eastward toward Germany, the FFI remained integral to operations across Brittany. Their knowledge of terrain, population networks, and German positions continued to shape strategic and tactical decisions. They observed the movement of German reinforcements, identified the location of artillery and ammunition dumps, and provided precise information that allowed for targeted strikes, minimizing risk to civilians while maximizing operational efficiency. The lessons of Brittany would resonate beyond the region, influencing Allied approaches to combining conventional forces with local irregular units throughout the European theater. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of the Brittany campaign was the demonstration that modern, mechanized armies could achieve far greater success when paired with motivated and knowledgeable local forces. Patton's Third Army, known for speed, armor, and audacity, achieved remarkable gains through the integration of the FFI, whose intimate understanding of local geography, human networks, and enemy psychology filled gaps that no map, aerial reconnaissance, or radio transmission could provide. Conversely, the resistance benefited from the firepower, logistics, and organizational capacity of a professional army, allowing them to strike with precision and impact while avoiding unnecessary losses. Stories of heroism and solidarity became legend among both Americans and the French. One account tells of an FFI fighter who, under machine gun fire, dragged a wounded American ranger to cover, treated his wounds using supplies scavenged from a German medic's bag, and held off advancing paratroopers until reinforcements arrived. When the battle ended, the Frenchman declined any formal commendation, stating simply, "He was my comrade. That is enough." Incidents like this multiplied throughout Brittany, forming a shared mythology of courage, sacrifice, and cooperation. By the end of September, the major battles had subsided, though scattered German resistance persisted. Lorient and Saint-Nazaire would not formally surrender until May of 1945, following the capitulation of Germany itself. Yet the campaign had achieved its strategic aims. It neutralized the threat of the fortified ports, liberated the population, and demonstrated the lethal synergy of conventional and irregular warfare. The FFI transitioned seamlessly into roles supporting reconstruction, local governance, and integration into the reconstituted French army under General Charles de Gaulle. Others quietly returned to civilian life, carrying the scars of years spent fighting under occupation. their deeds largely unrecognized beyond the local communities in which they lived. For the Americans, Brittany represented a vital chapter in the broader narrative of the ET Allied push through Western Europe. For the French, it was a moment of national restoration, where ordinary men and women reclaimed their homeland through courage, ingenuity, and defiance. For historians and military strategists, the campaign stands as a case study in the power of cooperation, demonstrating that even the most advanced mechanized army benefits immeasurably from integrating irregular forces familiar with local terrain, networks, and culture. Patton's Third Army would move on, pushing into Germany and beyond, but the legacy of Brittany and the lessons learned from the FFI would endure, informing approaches to warfare, resistance, and liberation for generations to come.